All right, perfect. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending from where you're joining us from. My name is Nicolas Ott. I work in the European Government Affairs team based in Brussels, and it's my distinct honor to welcome you to today's multi-stakeholder compendium launch event. We have a great lineup for you organized here today. I will be guiding you through the program, so to say. And first and foremost, it's my great honor and privilege to hand over the virtual mic, so to say, to Andres Yato, the Special Envoy for International Cyber Issues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. Andres, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this important launch event of the Compendium Cybersecurity and Sustainable Development, a Global Path Forward. First of all, a warm thank to everyone who has contributed, not least to the ITU, the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise, and Microsoft, of course, but also to all of you who have participated in the workshop or in any other form. Actually, during the last years, we have held numerous workshops in actually all continents of the globe, except of Antarctica. This, I think, in itself is an indication of our high ambitions, as well as of the importance that we all attach to this important work and process. Let me start with a few words from a Swedish perspective, how we engage and how we are systematically working to better integrate cyber in our development policies. Firstly, the Swedish government is raising its overall ambitions in the cyber and digital domain. We're just about to launch a national strategy for cyber and digital in our foreign and security policy. A red thread in this strategy is to promote an integrated approach to cyber, which cuts across different policy pillars: security policy, trade policy, and development. We do this because we're convinced that an effective cyber and digital policy requires that we break down silos that inhibit us from making use of the full range of tools at our disposal. Secondly, we're currently reforming our development policy. As part of this work, cyber resilience and digital development will be more firmly integrated into the broader sustainable development agenda. The overarching premise is, of course, that digitalization has the potential to supercharge development, but also that insufficient cybersecurity can undermine those same development achievements. Thirdly, part of this work is recognizing the importance of cyber capacity building as a tool to promote a free, open, and secure cyberspace based on democracy, human rights, and the principles of the rule of law. We have seen an increasing request for a demand-based approach for capacity building to enhance resilience in cyberspace. Digitalization is significant for global development as it can lift people out of poverty and improve opportunities to engage in international trade and other forms of global economic activities. Digital solutions help break down mobility barriers, discrimination, and gender inequalities. However, large part of the global population do not yet have access to the potential that digital development provides. This is especially true for women and girls. Bridging the digital divide is therefore instrumental for global development. At the same time, it must be acknowledged that digital societies and infrastructure are vulnerable to many forms of disruption, attacks, and malicious activities. If development and capacity building is not accompanied by security consideration, it poses a great risk to what has been built. There is a fine balance to strike between digital inclusivity and cyber security. So where do we go from here? This collaborative effort between the government of Sweden, ITU, the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise, and Microsoft provides valuable recommendations for how to incorporate digitalization into development in a safe way. Comprehensively integrating cyber resilience into development agendas requires a continuous and dedicated effort. We need to engage a variety of stakeholders. As mentioned in the Compendium, collaboration across sectors is key to cybersecurity, cybersecure capacity building, not least public-private partnership. We therefore work in conjunction with many partners and in many forums. For example, during the Swedish EU presidency, we hosted together with the EAS and the SIVA, a forum on cyber diplomacy and capacity building with the Indo-Pacific region. The EU continues to be a central partner in this regard. The same is, of course, true for the UN. We welcome the initiative of the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs to organize a high-level roundtable on capacity building the 10th of May, and hope that this compendium's recommendation can feed into an ongoing conversation on the topic. We also welcome further work in the open-ended working group towards a practical mechanism to facilitate capacity building within the forthcoming program of action. Clearly, we need to match a need-based approach with financial resources. Sweden stands ready to continue our support for capacity building efforts at the global level. We support the work of the UN ODA and in particular the UN Program of Action. We're eager to create further partnerships and alliances with civil society, including the private sector. We are pleased to continue our work as partners to the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise and the 2025 Global Forum in Geneva, as well as our support to the ITU. The private sector will be crucial in the implementation of our policy work on cyber resilience. We therefore stand ready to further engage with the industry. Finally, I look forward to following the discussion here today. This work has just started. We are at the end of the beginning, and I look very much forward to engage with all of you today. But do not hesitate to reach out to myself and my colleagues at the MFA if you want to continue the discussion on a more bilateral basis. I'm now happy to give the word to the CEO of Microsoft Sweden, Sofia Vikander. Please, Sofia.
Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. So thank you for inviting me. This compendium is a result of years of hard work and engagement from stakeholders from all over the world. I want to give a special thank you to everyone who has contributed. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Special Envoy of International Cyber Issues, Mr. Andres Giatto, for having embarked on this journey together with us, but also to the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise and the International Telecommunication Union for your strong engagement in our collective work. Without you, we would not have been here today. This multi-stakeholder initiative is important for us at Microsoft. We see it as our responsibility to contribute with our core competence within technology and cybersecurity to defend democracy. So, why is cyber security important for Microsoft? And why do we think it's important to have it included in development work? We are in society in the middle of an era of digital transformation. The goal is to achieve an universal and meaningful connectivity, and that should be the top priority in all our global efforts to achieve the sustainable development goals, but also to balance the hard fact that digitalization promises substantial economic and social benefits, but it also opens up the door for increased cybersecurity risks. And cyber threats can disrupt economies and compromise privacy, and it can be used to manipulate our societies. So this dual challenge of fostering cyber resiliency alongside with digital growth is not just an imperative for economic stability, but also a cornerstone in the trust of digital services that we are already having in our society, and that is an area that will grow, of course. Looking at the Compendium workshops, the recommendations that has been put forward doesn't only reflect the views of the sponsoring organizations. So throughout the past 9 months, numerous workshops have been held, bringing together experts across different industries, civil society, governments, in cybersecurity and development communities. They have given us invaluable insights that is reflected in this outcome document. And the collective findings emphasize the urgent need for a paradigm shift in how cybersecurity is perceived, how it's integrated and prioritized with traditional development agendas. And this includes integrating cybersecurity into a vast amount of development initiatives, enhancing a cross-sector collaboration and a cross-industry collaboration, but also looking at it from a supply chain perspective, so enhancing the supply chain security angle. It also requires both new skilling and upskilling in societies, and bridging the gap between cyber resilience and human rights. Last but not least, bridging the gap between policy and standardization. I am excited to work for a company, Microsoft, that is already advancing work across all of these areas that I just highlighted. For an example, we've been a proud supporter of the ACRA call and are working with partners around the world to implement its commitment. We're also investing in advancing human capacity and in cybersecurity skilling. We have a lot of different skilling initiatives that are for free. We also have a partnership with the International Telecommunication Unions and building on those efforts and with that we help to address the policy gap with focus on developing effective national cybersecurity strategies. These are just some examples. Others that we are focusing on is the Geneva Dialogue, where a multi-stakeholder partnership under the leadership of Switzerland is formed. And we are seeking to strengthen our cybersecurity supply chain and clarify the different roles and responsibilities in the cyberspace through that initiative. So, to conclude, we navigate the complex landscape today and in the digital future, and the Compendium workshops have paved the way for a deeper understanding of the challenges and the opportunities within cybersecurity and development. And the collective findings serve as a call for a joint collaborative and strategic efforts and actions to bridge the existing gaps and fostering a resilient and secure digital transformation that is aligned with the global development objectives. So Microsoft stands ready to continue to contribute with this effort, and I'm very much looking forward to the continuation and the start that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia, and also Andres for your opening remarks here. Once again, a big thank you also from my side for your contributions throughout this process. I have now this distinct pleasure to pass the floor to Marco Bisu, Chief of the Digital Network Society Department at the International Telecommunication Union, to actually walk you all through the compendium and give you a first glance of what we've compiled and launched today. Marco, over to you.
Thank you, Nicholas, and good morning, good afternoon, good whatever to everyone. Hello, my name is Marco, and thanks for the introduction, Nicholas. And well, of course, I work in ITU, and our team was the one engaging in the elaboration of the compendium. And as usual, it was really a great pleasure and actually fun to put this together. And it was only natural, the good outcome, because as as the special envoy and also the general manager of Microsoft mentioned, there is a long-standing collaboration among the four organizations, with GFCE, with Microsoft, with the government of Sweden. So it was really easy to work together for the elaboration and the development of the compendium. So just let me go through a bit on and quickly on the findings, which also let's say Sophia mentioned and also the special envoy mentioned. So it was a result of a kind of a multi-stakeholder consultation process composed by 7 workshops in 5 continents with almost 1,000 participants. So it was a large, I would say, large scale, let's say, input gathering that then resulted in the elaboration of recommendation. And the compendium is really simply structured with a piece dedicated to the findings, with some recurrent things that are always coming, and then a set of recommendation, which I'm not going to the detail for, but at least I mentioned some of them. Well, the findings are not revolutionary in nature, but I think it would are good to solidify some of the understanding that we have on the whole global let's say cyber environment. And it is about of course, let's say the understanding that there is to be let's say broad, I mean, an understand, I can say a need to integrate cyber into the development agenda. That's something that, again, it might look obvious, but I can assure you that in some of the countries, in several countries, this is not well understood yet by policymakers and the technical community. So while you find some of the recurring themes pretty obvious and pretty, let's say, for granted, but I think it is important to put this into a perspective. Same thing about the shortage of skill, same thing about the concept of skilling and reskilling, same thing about the importance of linking the standardization effort to let's say to the work and to the pieces of work that they're taken at the country level. And of course, this element of collaboration that in the recommendation are actually highlighted in two aspects. One, the intra-sector collaboration, meaning at the country level, and what the more, let's say, enhanced and international collaboration. So let's go into highlighting a little bit let's say the different recommendations, which are mainly 7, and again structured in main, let's say, in main points, and then articulated in sub elements. Just to note that the compendium is online, and maybe Caroline, apart from sharing the slide, you might want to post on the chat. Let's say, there you go, Nicholas. Thanks a lot. You already put it on the chat so everyone can have access. Okay, maybe we can go into the recommendation piece. So again, I think this point is pretty important. Again, even if it is not new, but it helps to understand how it's critical to have, let's say, the cybersecurity element, the cybersecurity understanding and the concept integrated into the development initiative. Traditionally, when you have let's say ICT for development, at least from the ITU perspective, you always talk about infrastructure, you always talk about connectivity, you always talk about let's say the usual suspects. But now cybersecurity, since few years, actually becomes part of the overall, let's say, ICT ecosystem. So it is important that also, in terms of, let's say, assistance intervention, cyber has been, it has to be taken as one of the dimension, one of the elements to be taken into consideration. So that was about the recommendation 1. Concerning the other one, again, that was what I was talking about, the kind of a cross-sector collaboration. We see that sometimes even in countries we have collaboration at the international level between the different actors, whether it's industry or international organization or governments collaborating among themselves at the country level, but we miss the element of collaboration in the country. And that's what this recommendation is about, is to instigate this concept of, again, let's say, a multi-stakeholder engagement by the different parties at the country level. So we talk about CERT-to-CERT cooperation, so, the incident response team from the different perspectives, so from the government perspective, from the national perspective, from the industry perspective, there needs to be let's say, hooked up and linked into the common understanding. We are talking about, of course, public-private partnership, which is not new, because I think it's for I don't know how many years we're talking about that, but also let's say developing frameworks that would facilitate and instigate this process. And sometimes it's easy to say than to do because of different agenda from the different stakeholders. But again, if we link this back into the first recommendation, which is about the need to anchor cyber into the development activities and into the development agenda of the country, I think that this is more than necessary. Okay, go ahead. The third piece is also something that is well known, which is the lack of knowledge and the lack of skill. So kind of having a little bit a human centric capacity concept of or narrative, it is really essential to facilitate the knowledge transfer and to carry on in making sure that, again, the cyber element, whether it's just purely IT security into policy, it is really a piece of the curriculum of the students, but also of the regular, let's say, capacity building and training that everyone dealing with the ICT and dealing with digital needs to have. So there is, of course, about dissemination of information resources, about needs-based capacity development, and everything that is related to making sure that we possess the basic knowledge that is necessary. And that would really raise the bar in terms of eliminating some of the risks that sometimes are just simply because we don't master, the basis of technology. That's something that, again, in some of the countries, quite evident. Okay. The other one, that's something that is coming, within the digital perspective is old, but within the understanding from some of the stakeholders is new, which is, let's say, linking security to supply chain. So that is kind of similar to the concept of security by design, to make sure that when there is a supply chain and when there is also, let's say, manufacturing and product development, there has to be, security has to be part of the process. And then, of course, it has to be anchored to the supply chain, but also anchored to the business processes that are related, that are basically, let's say, done by or made by the different enterprises, whether it is a small and medium or into the larger enterprises. So that's something that I think Microsoft has been dedicating lots of time on that, and they came out with lots of positive, quite useful recommendation on that. Okay, next one is about. And that's also something that we are starting to see, not just specifically on cyber, but also on what we consider emerging technologies, whether it's, let's say, the metaverse or AI, which is bridging the gap between the cyber resilience and the human rights. So basically having, again, human-centric approach means also understanding what are the implications on the human rights perspective on related to cybersecurity. And then again, the main element here is really to try to foster a dialogue between the different communities and the different parties, and to make sure that some of the issues linked to human rights are really addressed. And sometimes, again, we are still seeing in the international environment sometimes, let's say, a little bit of a conversation at the Human Rights Council, for example, or in the other organization that are dealing with human rights, but it is not a structured conversation across the board. And I think that's what we wanted to aim, what we wanted to mean in terms of bridging the gap, is to try to have a conversation that is more structured and more holistic in nature. All right. Next one is about, again, the kind of a standardization gap, but specifically vis-a-vis to the, let's say, to the cyber element. And again, that goes back a bit linked to the supply chain from the perspective of security by design concept, and making sure that, the standards are actually not only developed, but also, let's say, engage, translated into into the manufacturing process and into anything that might impact of increasing the level of security. And again here, well, ITU is a standard setting organization like ISO and others, and we always have this concept of making sure that the standardization element is, at least from the technical perspective from our side, is also of course part of the conversation. But with this recommendation standard are not just about technical standards, but kind of building, you know, standards in terms of norms, in terms of practices that can become, that can role model, you know, some of the behaviors. That was the idea. And then finally, the other one is about building trust, and this is the kind of the other side of the coin on the cross-sector collaboration and coordination. There is an intra part. There is a national level coordination. This is more about, again, you know, this kind of you know, very diversified international environment where sometimes we see, let's say, different communities going in different direction, which is good because it helps enriching the conversation. But on a certain moment, there should be a little bit of a conversion of ideas, and the norm setting piece that is coming, for example, to the governmental group of experts or to the open-ended working group. GFCE is also working a lot on that. Us, we are working a lot on that. Is to really trying to have a little bit of more, I don't want to say narrow, but aligned understanding in which direction we want to go. And that would be, from our perspective, based on the kind of a trust that even the organization is to add to each other, whatever they are coming from. So the technical community needs to talk with the policymaker. They need to talk with the international community. They need to talk with the government in a kind of as much as possible transparent manner. So that's it. Sorry if I spoke a little bit fast, but there was a lot to say. But I hope I kept the time. And then that's it. Thanks a lot again to Sweden, Microsoft, and GFCE for that. Again, we had a very let's say it was a very nice exercise. It was a pleasure and an honor for us. And get back to, I think, you, Nicolas, or Caroline, I don't know. But thanks a lot again.
Yes. Marco, thank you so much for walking us through this. This was great. Thanks again also from my side for having partnered with us on this journey over the last couple of months. It's been tremendous to have ITU and so many colleagues of you on board and help us to actually put this together. So thanks again. I'm now turning over the floor to my dear partner in crime in this lovely endeavor on the GFCE side. Oh, that's Teresa Horesova, who is the outreach manager at the GFC, who's going to moderate our panel discussion and walk us through the next half an hour. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, and also from me, hello to you all. We are 105 participants in the room today, so we do hope that this exchange that we will have in the upcoming, half an hour or so will be as interactive as only possible. For the modus operandi of that, I also have with me Caroline Train from the ITU, who will be monitoring the chat. So please, anybody, feel free to comment, bring your perspectives or questions if you have in the chat or later in the panel. Of course, we can also use the raise hand function and give you the floor. But to kick us off, we have a few kind of experts, definitely from various fields that we feel can give us again a different angle on the work that has been done. So allow me please to introduce this panel, which will comprise Naya Bampaliu, who is the executive director of CyberLab International. We also have Stan Byers, who is the cybersecurity team lead at the United States Agency for International Development. We also have with us Catherine Priceman, the political affairs officer at the United Nations Office for Disarmament. And last but not least, Kaja Ciglic from Microsoft, senior director for digital diplomacy. If you allow me, I will first like to go to you, Naya. Yes, you have been very much involved in the work on the intersection of development and security, very much involved in also putting the program together for the GC3B, the Global Conference on Cyber Capacity Building. Now, this compendium, we feel, complements the work that has gone to this conference as well. But could you give us some kind of like zoom out remarks on if you think that the discourse was kind of taken further? Over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. I hope you hear me well. First off, congrats to and kudos to all four organizations that, spearheaded this effort, because I think it is important to really build the knowledge base in this space. Unfortunately, still, if you ask me, I started in this space more than a decade ago, coming from development. So I was a development person, let's say, working in security, and never had this issue whether there is a disconnect. It was at least at the EU at the time, there was this opportunity. That said, I would like to kind of zoom out a bit on a couple of points I've seen also in the report that I really recommend everyone reading on some kind of thesis. And I think these usually come from the perspective of the traditional cyber capacity building community as it has evolved, kind of organically the last 10, 15 years, on that there is a widespread misconception that cyber resilience is predominantly a national security concern, and that actually is one of the reasons that it widens the gap between development community and cyber resilience. And the other one is the fact that we have, there is rather, I think it's mentioned even as a dilemma in the report on whether to prioritize cyber resilience versus, let's say, other pressing development tasks. And I would say none of this, I would claim that none of this is 100% true, because it's precisely more the view of more of the CCB community, I would say. And I think this is why it's really important to have efforts like this that kind of systematize the recommendations like we see in the compendium, because this is also the effort of the integration, let's say, of the different communities and the different cultures. And why I say this, I think it is important to flag that security has never been an issue for development, or at least in the last 20 years. Kofi Annan famously had the speech 20 years ago as a UN Secretary General that, we cannot have development without security and security without development. So thinking that there is an issue of misconception between, I think it's a matter of more a very narrow thinking. It's more a matter of like, how do we engage and how do we make the arguments and how do we actually see it as part of the spectrum of, development efforts and so on. I wanted to say that because, I was always a security person in development, and we never, let's say, had these issues. And I see this indeed, tagging it as a misconception, it creates a more of like a distance between the two instead of allowing the convergence amongst the different actors that they're working in the space. And the prioritization, it is a reality check. We're talking about, I think, the UN Secretary General in UNDP last year calculated we are about like $4 trillion behind in a financial gap in meeting SDGs. So it is not really about like, oh, we are not able to prioritize cyber resilience, but really how we can actually see it really have the integration modality, let's say, in it, and not see it as an additional cost, and really think through as there is a broad discussion also in the post 2030 agenda. Let's say, future, what is a kind of like a new global financing pact that we need to address the needs and incorporate this. I think especially Marco, because at the time that the original SDG agenda, let's say, was negotiated, I was also back there working in development, and even digital is not, it doesn't have its own specific goal. It was a reason for this. The history was that, you know, it was considered as an accelerator, a kind of across the board, this is how we're going to see digital, let's say, and since then we have a lot of work, including the leadership of ITU and UNDP with the SDG Digital Accelerator agenda, for example, like I think from last year, on how we see that. So it is more a matter of how do we actually connect all this and not have, let's say, a narrative or a philosophy even that is more development needs to consider cybersecurity. It is really, we need to find the right, let's say, approaches. And I'll come back, let's say, and I think that's why the recommendations, I would really, maybe in the follow-up, I would really like to focus, for me, the key ones on bridging the policy gaps and building trust, the last two recommendations that Marco mentioned, because I think this is kind of the ones that can unlock everything else, and I can, you know, kind of give more context on that in the as we continue the discussion.
No, yeah, thank you very much. There is definitely more to unpack, you know, later in the discussion, and I do hope that we will be able to go deeper in the various recommendations, like those that you pointed out now. And thanks also for reminding us that it's a no-brainer. The connection is there between these two worlds. But these hows and the practical steps ahead is definitely something that also motivated us in the work of the compendium. So I really hope that we can focus on that in the discussion. Stan, first of all, very good morning, and thank you. Thank you to Catherine as well for waking up so early to join us. But would you be able to give us your perspectives from a development agency?
Sure. Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be able to take part in this. I think this effort is very much needed, and it aligns very closely with kind of the way that we've been thinking about this at USAID. I mean, there's so much to talk about here, and there's so many different issues. I'm not going to try and cover all of it, but I want to talk a little bit about like what our evolution has been and where we've gotten to, and where we think some of the key issues might be for how we move as a development community to make progress on this issue. And really, the first is this building cyber into the development agenda. And a lot of that has been the internal discussion that we're having with our staff and with all the different organizations that we work with around the world, as well as with the different countries that we work with, to talk about why both, you know, these digital technologies, which I think people are starting to understand, but now cybersecurity is such an important part of development now. And we've started to talk about, you know, development is digital now. Almost everything we're doing across every sector is increasingly dependent on using digital technologies. But we haven't seen that commensurate investment in cybersecurity. And so we're seeing this growing gap. But at the same time, when we talk to development professionals who may not have a background in this, we're trying to emphasize from their perspective, you know, why this matters, and that this isn't an add-on, but that this is integral to actually achieving, you know, achieving the SDGs, improving healthcare, improving education, improving economic development, you know, democratic institutions, all of these different things. And so we've really kind of been trying to expand the aperture of what we mean, what cybersecurity is, to get people to understand that it is more than a technical issue. It's more than a digital computer-based issue. It has big political, social, and economic ramifications. And it's not just changing what our development programs do and how we need to think about them, but it's changing the environments profoundly in which we work. And so the information environments in many of the countries where we're working, the way people are consuming information, the way different systems are being set up, the way everything is being digitalized, that has big impacts on how we need to think about development. And therefore, we need to kind of start thinking in new models and thinking on new timescales because of how quickly things are changing. But then that's one way to look at it. But the other part that we've really tried to instill within USAID and from our team working internally is to build awareness for that we need to improve, we need to adapt ourselves as a development agency, as a donor. We need to think internally what needs to change. And so we've worked really hard to build awareness. When we started this conversation a few years ago within the agency, a lot of people ask, why are we even talking about this? Why is a development agency talking about cybersecurity? We've now shifted to away from that conversation towards, okay, this is a big issue. How do we start to address it? And this is still something very new to a lot of people in our agency, and again, of the partners that we work with. But I think there's now a broad recognition that this is very important, and we have to like keep that conversation moving to, okay, what are the practical next steps we can take? And so we're also trying to build this into how we operate, into our structures, into, you know, we recognize that our procurement mechanisms need to change. We need to create new incentives in the way that we fund development. We realize we need to do new staffing and structures to build it, bring in the right capacities to work across all these different sectors. We need to think about training. We need to think about how do we engage with all these different parts of development and integrate that into our broader policies and the strategies for the agency. And so that's a conversation that we're increasingly having now. And then finally, you know, it's been touched on already, but I'll emphasize it again, this need to really work with the private sector and with companies like Microsoft and with other big tech companies that are having, this just simply isn't going to, we're not going to be able to do what needs to be done with development funds. We can do some of it. We can do capacity building. We can look for gaps to fill. But this is, because this is so big, because this is affecting every sector and affecting every economy at scale very quickly, we are not going to be able to meet these goals unless the private sector is playing a very active role, and there's much better integration between what we're trying to do from development community and what the private sector is doing. And that means not only does the private sector need to try to better understand things from a development perspective and understanding new markets, and particularly emerging frontier markets, but as development community, we need to better understand it from a private sector perspective. And we need to be able to speak that language and talk, well, a lot of what we do is from an altruistic perspective of trying to improve and achieve these goals. We also have to think about it from a private sector perspective of like, how do we create the right investment climates? How do we create the right incentives for the private sector to go into the markets where we can, that really need to build this capacity? And that, you know, some of the areas in the world that most need to build out this capacity have the least investment. And so we need to try to find ways to change that dynamic, and that means improving our communication between sectors. And that, again, changing some of our models and our thinking and our skills building within the development community. Obviously, there's a lot more I could say here. I'll leave it at that, but I'm glad to talk further. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Stan. It was useful that you also shared with us how the work at USAID is kind of going on in trying to bring these silos a bit closer together. You talked about the practicality, such as changing the procurement mechanisms, but also about kind of the changing or raising the awareness internally. And rest assured that the homework is also on the side of the security actors in the field to also sensitize their staff and their internal thinking about the development angle to this. So really appreciate it. Going to you, Catherine. In the compendium, we have also referred and linked a lot of these discussions to some important processes going on at the UN, be it around the open-ended working group or the Global Digital Compact. It would be quite useful for us to hear your reflections on how this can be integrated in your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Good morning from New York. I'm glad I'm not the only early bird. I assume Stan is also here in the East Coast somewhere, but nice to greet you here in the morning. So thank you very much to Sweden, ITU, Microsoft, and GFCE for the kind invitation. I feel I think the sequencing is quite useful, going from a perspective of the development agency to the perspective of the UN and the security center processes. But in general, I mean, as has been said already by the special envoy and Ms. Vikander and others, this is a critical linkage and one that is garnering increasing attention from states in multilateral processes and discussions, including those under the auspices of the UN. And I think that there's a real drive to break down silos, as others have said, that it's not separately just development goals, separately cybersecurity goals, but that these are really things are inherently connected. So we're seeing this across the open-ended working group, as has been mentioned by the special envoy, discussions at the ITU, the Internet Governance Forum, the World Summit on the Information Society process, the Global Digital Compact and the Pact for the Future under the umbrella of the Summit for the Future. So we see digitalization coming front and center in multilateral discussions, and it's cutting across all of our exchanges from SDGs to security to human rights, which is precisely what the very useful Compendium is addressing. We even saw discussions of this at last year's Commission on the Status of Women, where innovation and technological change, education in the digital age was the priority theme. So rapid digitalization has created new demands for resources, expertise, and skills to not only reap digital dividends for development, but also to manage related safety and security risks. Growing digital threats, including those related to cyber and AI, have the potential to stifle growth, weaken the resilience of critical infrastructure, erode trust in the digital environment, and ultimately endanger lives. So 2024 is a pivotal moment of many intersecting processes and opportunities. So in this regard, the release of the Compendium is a very welcome and timely development as we head into the Summit of the Future in September 2024, which is an initiative of the Secretary General to have a pact for the future to revitalize multilateral commitment to the major goals, including sustainable development, international peace and security, human rights, etc. So states are right now negotiating the Pact for the Future, a global digital compact, a declaration on future generations, all in addition to other ongoing processes, as has already been mentioned, the open-ended working group on information communication technologies, which is heading towards its conclusion in 2025. So in this way, there are many entry points for building out the pathway of the relationship between cybersecurity and development. And this is particularly important as we head into the final years of the 2030 agenda, as we hear the Secretary General and others calling for turbocharging these goals. So I'd like to very quickly focus on a couple of the overarching objectives and the particular recommendations of the Compendium, which of course the very actionable recommendations are really applicable at the international, intra-regional, national, and local levels. But of course, from the UN's perspective, I'll focus on the global level. So a couple of things that I think are particularly relevant. One, integrating cybersecurity into development initiatives, which, I think, as Marco said, is really overarching and might seem self-evident, but I think that there's still a need to develop that policy narrative. So it is important that existing frameworks and processes are used to advocate this relationship and mainstreaming. The OEWG, states are increasingly aware of this. At the last session in March, many references to the ACRA call. So I think that was a useful point of discussion. And states continue to underscore that peaceful cyberspace is essential for closing the digital divide. So the OEWG will remain an avenue to raise these issues. But also the Global Digital Compact, which is currently underway, and therein potential commitments could be made with regards to mainstreaming the role of cybersecurity in development strategies and programs, and strengthening and promoting cybersecurity related knowledge and skills among international development stakeholders. So I think some of these elements can also be centered there. A first reading of that compact will happen in the beginning of April, so it's very much happening right now, and it could be a moment to build out this relationship. Second, creating human capacity. So states under UN auspices and other multilateral processes have underscored the need to promote better understanding of the needs and the aim of narrowing the digital divide through tailored capacity building efforts in the area of cybersecurity. So states acknowledge the pressing need for building capacity and also good practices in a range of areas like diplomatic, legal, policy, legislative. So capacity building remains a central point of discussion in cybersecurity, and building out that individual institutional technical expertise. So this capacity building, I can assure you, is really a cross-cutting aspect of all of the OEWG discussion. So states really continue to explore ways of building capacity to implement the framework for responsible state behavior, which has emanated from the OEWG and its predecessors, which has really been considered an essential building block for sustainable digital development. So while their further leveraging of this relationship can happen, it is centrally addressed in the agenda. And I wanted to thank the Special Envoy for already raising the Global Roundtable on ICT security capacity building under the auspices of the OEWG that will take place on the 10th of May. And it will include a signature panel on building cyber resilience for sustainable development by bridging the global capacity gap. So I hope that I trust that the compendium will serve as a really useful resource for that discussion. It's meant to be a high-level event, again, to bring high-level attention to the importance of this linkage. So states are invited to bring their ministers and other high-level officials. We hope to have the Secretary General to bring attention to this. And then finally, just wanted to close with the building trust aspect. And I want to conclude because I think this is one of the most important recommendations, because we really need trust between all stakeholders. And this goes to what Stan said as well about the role of the private sector. Cybersecurity is such a unique security topic in the UN, so far as it's really cannot be confined to state discussions, which is the traditional way of diplomacy in the UN, but it's just simply not possible because of the important role of the private sector in owning and operating so much of the ICT infrastructure and the resources, and having the capacity to support capacity building from a very practical standpoint of the resources, et cetera. And so it's really important that we build that trust among the stakeholders. And in the open-ended working group, we talk a lot about confidence building measures. So specific measures states can take to build confidence with a view to preventing misperception and escalation in cyberspace. And we really need this. We have an initial set of those measures, but perhaps states can even explore one specifically dedicated to the relationship between cybersecurity and development, a capacity building measure that draws that linkage and that uses development work to build confidence and trust in the area of cyber security. So that would be one also recommendation to build on the good content of the compendium. So I will leave it there and turn it back to Teresa. And thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you for your remarks, Katarina, and also, for stressing how important this year actually is. Rest assured that in kind of our considerations and brainstorming about what next after the compendium launch, we are having the UN busy agenda, for the next months, and the various processes definitely closely in mind, because that is quite an important link. You, as well as other speakers before you, have referred to multiple times to multi-stakeholder cooperation with the private sector. So that's, of course, an excellent segue to give the floor to you, Kaya. So please take the floor.
Thank you. And I will try, I'll try to not repeat too many things, but just go and sort of I think pull out a few of the points that were made earlier throughout the conversations and sort of give a little bit of a private sector spin on some of those. I think the first thing, because you mentioned the multi-stakeholder efforts, I think to keep in mind, and part of the reason why we've engaged in this compendia, but also others that we've done in the past, is even though we all agree that there needs to be multi-stakeholder collaboration in this area, bringing together not just the private sector and governments, but also civil society, for sure. it's hard for any one of us to understand how this cooperation would look like and sort of what form it takes. And so through this compendiums, but also the previous one, we've tried to both build trust between the different communities, because I think a lot of the times, the language we all use is different. You know, what an attack means in a private sector context and what it means in a state context are very different. You know, bridging the understanding between the different communities from what Stan was saying earlier, sort of what the actual development needs are on the ground in specific countries, with, for instance, what private sector police and understand from their own perspective of what is needed on the ground, which is often, to be honest, informed by views from where the companies are, and not necessarily where having enough recognition of sort of what the context is in a new geography or in a new country that there would be a market entry to, as well as just understanding of that there are discussions going on in the different international fora. I think I think there is not, for sure, there is very, very little awareness across the development community of the capacity building push and focus in the sort of more nation-state, national security context that is happening, whether it's at the UN or the different groups outside the UN, like the GFCE, or sort of even at the EU. I think the communities continue to be very disconnected. So the ability to actually work together on something and sort of pull together a framework for potential corporations and next steps is something that we hope this work contributes to and clarifies, and sort of starts getting us to a point where when we say what is multi-stakeholder cooperation, we can actually say, oh, okay, there's this thing that's been done before and we can build on it, or we could do something similar, versus sort of being in this standoff almost about sort of, oh, but should the private sector be involved, or should civil society be in the room when the governments are having conversations? So I think it's hopefully a helpful sort of path forward on what can we do when we work together. I think the other thing, and it was repeated across all the I think everybody more or less on the panel said this, cyber security, it's such a technology overall, but the cyber aspect of technology is such an important part of everyone's lives, work, how governments work today, that we make assumptions that these investments or the efforts to improve security are basically made as part of the development corporation, or even just the part of the Sustainable Development Goals, because they are such an essential part of it, but where they're not necessarily spelled out or called out. And I think what we found is that what we need to do is actually call out the need for greater cybersecurity, both in terms of the investment side, of awareness side. A little bit, like the example that everybody kind of gives is you teach children when they sort of to cross the road, look left and right. I think that the same attitude needs to move in sort of just use of technology all up. And that means that it needs to be specifically called out repeatedly, and people need to remember that, part of the investment, it needs to go on your security, whether it's on technology that secures your systems, or it goes on education and awareness and capacity building. So, as we go into the conversations at the UN throughout this year, and sort of looking to, like you said, turbocharge the SDGs, I think the we need to remember that security needs to be at the core of that effort, or it becomes a massive vulnerability for all of us as a community. The only last point, because I know we're running out of time, I would say is thank you for all the 4 entities that like worked on this, but also the plus 1,000 people that participate. I think without having their feedback and sort of their engagement, and I'm sure a lot of you are actually on the call, and perspectives, I think the compendium would be a much lesser resource than it is now. So I just wanted to say thank you.
No, and thank you, Kaya. Always useful to hear your reflections. And, thanks for also pointing out kind of the human aspect, how this is close to us as individuals, not only kind of a high policy debate here. Excellent. So those were the kind of kickoff comments from the speakers, and I can see that the chat is getting busy, which is great, because once again, I also recognize a lot of names of participants that were in part that were part of the regional kind of consultations that we've been having in the build-up of this compendium. So I hope that you also see how many of the points that were raised at those regional consultations really made it to the compendium and also to the discussion that we are having here today. Caroline, may I quickly turn to you to kind of share with us what have been the main aspects in the discussion in the chat?
Sure, we've had 2 great questions in the chat. The first one is a tough one for our speakers today, of what would success look like in this process? And then following on that, and perhaps part of that answer might be collaborating with small non-for-profit organizations. How can those smaller organizations, where they may not be as well resourced as other organizations, be part of this effort? We've also had one just come in about how the private sector can contribute to creating human capacity that meets these needs and also is in line with the Sustainable Development Objectives.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Maybe we can start with the tough one on the success. Yes, it's good to define success at the beginning of the journey. Maybe I can quickly give a few perspectives, kind of from the partners, in the compendium. When we started, we of course first, thought, let's collect, how the regions feel, how the community feels about these interactions, and let's make sure that we have these consultations really in a multi-stakeholder setup. So that has been kind of the driving, the driving principle. Later, when we realized that there are quite some concrete suggestions and recommendations, sometimes even almost frustrations that have been shared during those consultations about why we haven't really progressed more. I think that the success that we might have had in mind was to really come up with some concrete suggestions, some concrete plans in this regard, that we do not just describe, yes, there is a disconnect and something should be done, but we try to bring some very concrete suggestions to the table. But I welcome also our other speakers, if you can kind of help us, to determine what the success should look like, because as we will also, speak later in the event, this is not like the end of the story. It's more the beginning, and we really want to hear from others how we should continue so that this work is useful, so that it's well complementary to other processes, and that there is something concrete coming out of that. But Naya, over to you, as I can see you have your hand up already.
Thank you, Teresa. And actually, this is one of the things when reading the compendium, and I participated in one of the events in Europe, and really seeing the value add exactly on enhancing this knowledge base, because we are still in this situation where we really need to, indeed, as Kaya and others mentioned, to have that language and to bring the communities together. For me, it is contributing to faster learning loops. across the different actors. And I think the Compendium targets some of the recommendations is more, let's say, targeting the development community. Some are more on the traditional cyber capacity building community and the like. And I think it is very much contributing to also the key actions, let's say the 16 actions that the ACRA call also kind of gives, and in some strategic areas. The learning loops, I think what I find that is needed is exactly how do we take this either theoretical understanding or, let's say, interest in bringing the different actors to step up their game, is how do we enhance the learning and the skill sets, let's say, of those very much engaging in the international cyber policy realm and the capacity building, to learn the lessons that for development community it has taken 70 plus years to learn, because we are also in a moment in time where development in its own right is, facing its own challenges in terms of, I think Stan mentioned about, the need for new models. It is not only vis-a-vis CCB, cyber, but also it is vis-a-vis, let's say, thinking outside the traditional development models. And I think their locally led and locally sustained development is something that is almost a truism 70 years on, but I think currently there is a huge push vis-a-vis that effort that links very much to the question that we got on, how can local actors play into the ecosystem? And this requires both the approach of the developing partners, the financing institutions, but also the national authorities and understanding, and this huge methodological knowledge on this. But how do we actually integrate this also in the CCB so that they don't feel like we have to reinvent what we mean about locally led, locally sustained efforts in the space of cyber capacity building? And finally, I think the second part would be on the private sector and I see it here more on private sector development, where again, development community has been engaging as a core, let's say, field on how do we create, market approaches that drive sustainable economic growth in all sorts of areas, we trade and so on. How do we use those lessons to actually create also the cybersecurity markets and skills locally, and elevate therefore the broader hygiene expertise, the skills that we need, because clearly, we're not gonna, we need the human capital in the part as part of the process. And I think this I tried to answer. So that would be the success for me. How do we actually create faster learning loops? Both in the development community about what we need vis-a-vis cyber resilience, and the other way around on those engaging to date on international cyber capacity building and the international policy discussions, primarily not only within the international security realm, but those the more traditional actors, in integrating those lessons that so that we don't waste another let me not say waste. We not spend 10 more years thinking about the solution, because solutions are there. It's really about really putting them in practice, and they will never be 100% success. But I think that for me that would be a huge success, especially because the private sector development and it really is also about using domestic resource mobilization, investments, incorporation of cyber resilience in integrated national financing frameworks. It is a lot of these things that we have the tools. We just need to exactly, I don't know if we need to create a new framework, but it's really about better positive feedback loops.
Thank you very much, Naya. Let's try for that. Stan, over to you.
Sure. I'll try and answer a couple of these questions and do it as concisely as I can. So I think the question of what success looks like is an important one that we need to kind of ask up front. And there's much more thinking that needs to go into that. But if I had to think of one concrete measure that we could use to try to simplify it down, I think what I would look at is, are we seeing sustained, consistent investment and increasing investment from the private sector both local investors and also internationally in these markets, in emerging frontier markets, in cybersecurity. And the reason I point to that is, one, is measurable. Two, it indicates to achieve that, we need to see improvements in government and in local government, of them putting in place the right policies and strategies, regulations, and so forth, as well as supporting the investment climate in those countries in this sector. And then but the other part is, from a development standpoint, we need to be thinking about how we can work again with the private sector to create the right incentives for investment there. And again, we should be looking at local investors as well as international investors, and how you bring those different potential funding sources together. And finally, to kind of also go to the second question of, how do you do this in a way that aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals? I think that's a big role for, I think, particularly us as donors to think about, but also that we can do that in partnership with the private sector, is create the right incentives, particularly for youth in a lot of these countries. There's so many, we see this actually as a big opportunity, and it's something we're starting to explore more, is how to work with the youth communities to build these skill sets in not just digital, but cyber as well, and give them a career path that allows them to build out that capacity and to get experiences beyond just what's right in front of them, and they see a way to actually do this. I know from a lot of experience on the ground that there's a lot of very talented, savvy youth that are hungry for more opportunities, and we have a global and local economies that are desperate for these skills. So if we can align those things, create those opportunities, and then for the development goals, make it a way so that there's also incentives to spend at least some time in civil society, in government, in nonprofits, helping build those capacities, and then also to continue to build your skill set, afterwards, and to continue to build your career and to get internships with private companies, whether it be locally or internationally. There's so many different ways that we can do this, and some great models that are already out there, but that needs to be something that we start to think about from a development perspective, is how do we really leverage that talent that's already in these countries, and that then as they can build out their capacity, it's going to help the whole market develop. And those skills can also be exported, because there is no geographic boundary to this. And so that becomes actually another really attractive piece of it, that, if a country can build that skill set locally, they can export it to pretty much anywhere in the world, and becomes a big opportunity for them. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stan. Those were very practical suggestions there. We are running a little bit out of time for this segment, but I definitely do want to give the opportunity to Kaya and Catherine. But if you can please be very brief, and Kaya, may I start with you?
Sure. So I mean, maybe just to build on what Stan was saying in terms of, and trying to answer the question around what the tech sector can do in terms of investing in skilling in this area, more or less. I think from a Microsoft perspective, what we try to do is try to advance initiatives that would then spark further activity in this space. So a lot of the work that we've been doing over the past few years on cybersecurity skilling has really been focused on targeting minority communities within the different, whatever the minority would be within a particular location, right? Whether it's women, whether it's communities of color, whether, in different geographies, different groups. But with the idea of tapping that really untouched group talent, for instance, for women, I think they're across the board around the world. The number of women in cybersecurity is very, very low, and effectively doing things like train the trainer efforts, where you take the sort of the knowledge that we have, we work with a civil society group that knows how to do like learning, because it's not necessarily our strong suit, and then work with them to create first sort of small, first effectively programs that can be run locally, and then then they can effectively self-sustain over time. The other thing, and I think it's very important to remember in this space, is just everything moves so fast when it comes to technology. And I think, you know, if we 2-3 years ago were very, very focused on investing in cybersecurity skilling, and today we're really, really investing in AI skilling and sort of with a cyber component. But I think the thing that the tech sector should do more broadly is to ensure that the education campaigns, whether they are a little bit like the ones I've talked about that we sponsor to sort of kickstart something, or the ones that the governments are pursuing and investing in, are sort of keep up to date with what's going on in the tech sector, and sort of with particularly in the cybersecurity space, with the threats and the defenses that exist. And I think that is something to keep in mind. I think just regular kind of refreshes, re-engagements, and partnering with the tech sector going forward.
No, thank you very much, Kaya. And you also touched upon another question that appeared in the chat, actually, so that's really helpful. Catherine, would you like to share any reflections, quick ones, please, if I may ask you on these questions?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have too much to add. I won't belabor the point. Just to agree with Stan in terms of looking at success in a measurable way. I think one of the biggest successes of the SDGs was having the accompanying indicators that were specific and measurable and, you know, time bound. Separate from the fact if we will be able to achieve all of them, but I think that's the way, is to really be measurable. So looking at things like financial allocation and things that can really be concretized is the way forward. Thanks.
Thank you also, Catherine, Kaya, Naya, Stan, also others for the questions. I would now like to encourage you to continue the discussion in the chat, because there is actually quite a lot going on, so we can dig deeper. But at this moment, I would like to pass the floor back to our MC, Nicholas. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you to our panelists for this lovely and lively discussion. I really appreciated the insights that you've provided. We now have a few minutes left to hear from David Van Duren and Marina Vis-Ross on their concluding remarks and their overarching reflections. We'll start with David Van Duren, who's the co-director of the GFCE. Over to you, David.
Yes, thank you, Nicholas. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me first, on behalf of the GFCE, thank you all for your fruitful contributions and discussions today. I think hearing this, it's hard to capture the rich substance of the compendium and the outcomes of all these previous meetings and of today, of course, into just a few sentences. I think what's important to stress here is that this initiative is a significant part of a bigger picture and a longer history. I think in the panel it was also stressed, I think it was referred to a statement of Kofi Annan, there's no development without security, no security without development. That was around 20 years ago. And more, I see that digital development and cyber resilience are the same side of a coin, both foundational for further economic prosperity and sustainable development. And for me, this is also a personal tale, starting back in 2013. And at the time, I was in charge of shaping the second national cybersecurity strategy for the Netherlands. And the core idea of this cyber strategy revolved around the concept of what we called a triangle that highlighted the interconnectedness between cybersecurity, social progress, and economic development. And the same notion guided us when the GFC was established in 2015 as a multi-stakeholder platform, motivated by the global need for more coordination for cyber capacity building. And currently we are over 200 members and partners. And although we had these great ideas at that time, around 10 years ago, both the cybersecurity community and the development community were, I think, not ready yet to interconnect in a concrete way. I think both communities have been working a lot in silos, too much disconnected from each other. And I think this event and workshop meetings over the last months are building, and I believe, upon new momentum, bringing these communities together and also cooperate in a more concrete and impactful way. And I feel that all the partners around the table today can really drive the change needed on that practical level. What's important, I believe, is a collaborative, coordinated approach. And I think that's crucial for success. So we can together enlarge the pool of resources and also make use of it in a more effective way as possible. Our efforts will not be one and done. As new development practitioners enter the field and new initiatives come into force, and we will need to continue to revisit the recommendations in the compendiums made and ensure that they are addressed. And I think the partners around this compendium preparation, the ITU, Microsoft, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, and our organization, the GFCE, have some future plans on further engagements. And I think the feedback of, all those who are here today on what would be most practical, I think is to all of us very welcome. The collaborative efforts of partners behind this event, the previous consultations, the compendium, I think complement our efforts in the best way possible. That's how I see it. And I think the recommendations we have discussed today and also the next steps in the compendium. I think it helped us identify several issues and needs that will feed into concrete action steps in the future. For example, build a pool of skilled cybersecurity professionals, harmonizing cyber resilience policies and standards, building trust and partnerships. I think they're all discussed today. I think they're all important, also in regard to future steps. And what's also important is that we feed these inputs to other policy fora. And I think that was mentioned before, for example, in the UN or the EU. Like I said before, it's no surprise that for the GFC, the discussion on the interplay of cybersecurity and digital development is a topic of crucial importance. And in fact, the desire to connect these two communities has been the guiding principle behind the first edition of the Global Conference on Cyber Capacity Building, also called the GC3B, which took place last year. And we already started preparing 2.5 years ago. I think the compendium also includes a reference to the ACRA call, and which is the main outcome of the GC3B. It was already referred to, and the ACRA call will guide our efforts to make sure that the outcomes of the GC3B are brought into action, and that's important. For those who are here, to date, we have 65 endorsers of the call. If you are not yet among the endorsers, we welcome you to consider that. The ACRA call is a concrete global action framework which supports countries in strengthening their cyber resilience and explicitly making the connection with the development community. And also that was, for example, you could also see that in using a common language that is recognizable for both the cybersecurity and the development community. Concluding, this is a process, it's a journey. We are really looking as GFC forward to the next stop. The GC3B hosted and organized in May 2025 in Geneva, Switzerland. And, also looking forward, I would say, wouldn't it be great if we could present at the next GC3B some concrete examples and best practices on cooperation between cybersecurity and the development communities. I really look forward to hearing more from Marina from the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, who is here, and with who we as GFCE are grateful to partner with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. It's a perfect transition to Marina Weiss-Ross, who's the head of the Arms Control, Disarmament and Cybersecurity section at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland. Marina, over to you.
Thank you, Nicola, and I'm honored to say a few words at the end of this great event. And first of all, many thanks to Sweden, ITU, Microsoft, and GFCE. And first of all, congratulations to the successful launch of this useful compendium. I'm really looking forward to studying a bit more in detail and look at the recommendations that were also discussed today. And I'm sure it will inspire many constructive conversations, including in my own government. So from our side, we are convinced that cybersecurity is crucial for sustainable development because, and I'm just to cite a few that were discussed today as well, it safeguards critical infrastructure, it protects sensitive data, and it fosters trust in digital systems. And I'm mentioning those coming more from the security angle, as was also discussed. Of course, there's many more aspects, but I think from our side, that's also what we see, and we work really very closely with our colleagues from development to really also internally try and build those bridges or strengthen those bridges. Because without strong cybersecurity measures, development efforts can be derailed, leading to economic losses, disruptions in service, and hindrances in achieving long-term goals such as the SDGs, as was mentioned today. And it is in the interest of development cooperation across all sectors and actors that digital systems are more resilient. And therefore, exploring how the linkages between international cooperation in the digital field and strengthening of cyber resilience can be built and made operational should become a priority. I'm very happy to see how these discussions really have also evolved over the past month and years, because bridging those two fields have in the past mostly existed separate from each other is not an easy effort. And we've seen this in arms control, a field that I come from, and I think it's again we have tried to build those bridges, and it took time, and it's an effort, and it's also about changing mindset and adopting other perspectives. But I truly believe it's a very, very important effort that all of us should delve into, and we need a clear vision and the strategic support, of course. And that brings me to the Global Conference on Cyber Capacity Building. We are thrilled to contribute to those strategic efforts, and by welcoming the second iteration of the GC3B, still growing on me, in short, to Geneva on May 14th and 15th, 2025. And by hosting in Geneva, we aim to support the process initiated by the first GC3B in Ghana and its outcome document, the Accra Call, as was mentioned today, which highlights the fact that strong cyber resilience is a key factor for sustainable development that requires more political and financial attention. So we are looking forward to offering a platform in Geneva for actors to share their success stories and lessons learned on integrating the strengthening of cyber resilience into international development efforts. And of course, Geneva is home to many active actors in cybersecurity and capacity building, including, of course, the ITU. So hosting the second conference there will be a great opportunity also to build on and to leverage synergies even further. And with that, we would, from our side, from Switzerland, from the Swiss side, we would like to encourage all of you to support those strategic efforts on mainstreaming cybersecurity in development. And we are hoping to welcome many of you in Geneva in May 2025. We're looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marina, to you personally for being here today and contributing to this journey, but overarchingly to your ministry and the federal government overall for really supporting this overarching endeavor and effort. We're all, I think, very much excited and looking forward to the GC3B taking place in Switzerland next year. For all of our participants here today, thank you very much. This concludes the the multi-stakeholder compendium launch. Feel free to check out the full report via the link that was shared in the chat. And stay tuned for further updates that we'll be channeling either through social media or through email. Have a wonderful day.